Marcus Ellison was not an ordinary man. He was the kind of leader people admired, calm, intelligent, and respected in every room he entered. After years of hard work, he had built a business empire from nothing, a symbol of what dedication and discipline could achieve. That morning, Marcus had an important flight scheduled on his private jet. He was heading to a meeting that could decide the future of his company. His team was already waiting at the airport, buzzing with excitement and nerves. To them, it was another business trip. To Marcus, it was a chance to secure one of the biggest deals of his life. The private jet gleamed under the morning sun, polished and perfect. The crew stood ready, smiling politely as Marcus approached with his confident but humble stride. Among the staff was Clara, a senior flight attendant known for her professionalism. She had served many high-profile clients before, but something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the tight schedule, or maybe the way the CEO's team rushed around made her anxious. She greeted Marcus with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He nodded back, unaware of the storm that was quietly forming. As Marcus and his team settled into the luxurious cabin, the atmosphere was light. The executives chatted about numbers, projections, and strategies. The hum of the engines created a calm background as the jet prepared for takeoff. Marcus looked out the window, his thoughts drifting. For him, flying was more than travel, it was reflection time. He liked silence, calm, and order, and everything seemed to fall into place. But for Clara, every second felt heavy. She had barely slept, dealing with personal issues that no one on the plane knew about. When the plane took off, Marcus asked for a simple black coffee. Clara nodded and went to prepare it, but a small spill in the galley made her more nervous. She took longer than usual. When she finally returned, Marcus politely said, "Thank you, but please be careful next time. I prefer it a bit stronger." His voice was calm, but his tone carried authority. For Clara, already on edge, those words cut deeper than he intended. She forced a smile and nodded, but inside, frustration simmered. A few minutes later, she overheard Marcus quietly giving feedback to another crew member about attention to detail. Though he wasn't talking about her, Clara took it personally. To her, it felt like he was questioning her competence. Her mind started replaying every stressful moment of the morning. The tension she had held in began to grow. The jet's elegant cabin now felt small, almost suffocating. Marcus continued his discussion with his executives, unaware of the emotional storm just a few steps away. He was talking about leadership, about how respect and patience build trust. The irony of the situation was almost poetic, though no one could see it yet. Clara, still upset, walked past him carrying a tray. One of Marcus's assistants asked her for another drink, and she sighed audibly. Marcus looked up, his calm expression soft but firm. "Is everything okay, miss?" he asked gently. That question meant his kindness was the spark. Clara felt embarrassed, as if the entire cabin was watching her every move. Her thoughts blurred with emotion. In that single moment, logic disappeared. She turned to respond, but words failed her. Instead, a sharp, impulsive motion broke the silence. Her hand struck Marcus across the face. The sound was small, but in the quiet cabin it echoed like thunder. Everyone froze. Time seemed to stop. The executives' jaws dropped. One of them gasped softly. Marcus didn't move. His eyes widened, but his face stayed composed. Clara instantly realized what she had done. Her hand trembled. She whispered an apology that no one could fully hear. The jet felt colder now. No one spoke. Even the engine seemed quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Marcus slowly leaned back in his seat. His team looked at him, waiting for his reaction. But he didn't shout. He didn't call for help or demand punishment. He just sat there, silent, with a calm that was more frightening than anger. That silence said more than words ever could. For the next few minutes, no one dared to speak. Clara stood by the galley, tears starting to form. Her mind raced with regret. She wished she could undo what had just happened. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, wondering what their boss would do. To the others, Marcus looked composed. But inside he was hurt, not by the physical act, but by what it represented. Disrespect, impulsiveness, and a complete lack of professionalism on his own jet. A place that was supposed to represent excellence, control, and peace. He replayed the moment in his head again and again, trying to understand how something so small could explode into something so shocking. In those 10 quiet minutes, The atmosphere on the plane changed forever. Everyone knew that when Marcus finally spoke, nothing would be the same. The man known for his calm decisions was about to make one that no one would forget. Marcus Ellison was not an ordinary man. He was the kind of leader people admired, calm, intelligent, and respected in every room he entered. After years of hard work, he had built a business empire from nothing, a symbol of what dedication and discipline could achieve. That morning, Marcus had an important flight scheduled on his private jet. He was heading to a meeting that could decide the future of his company. His team was already waiting at the airport, buzzing with excitement and nerves. To them, it was another business trip. To Marcus, it was a chance to secure one of the biggest deals of his life. The private jet gleamed under the morning sun, polished and perfect. The crew stood ready, smiling politely as Marcus approached with his confident but humble stride. Among the staff was Clara, a senior flight attendant known for her professionalism. She had served many high-profile clients before, but something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the tight schedule, or maybe the way the CEO's team rushed around made her anxious. She greeted Marcus with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He nodded back, unaware of the storm that was quietly forming. As Marcus and his team settled into the luxurious cabin, the atmosphere was light. The executives chatted about numbers, projections, and strategies. The hum of the engines created a calm background as the jet prepared for takeoff. Marcus looked out the window, his thoughts drifting. For him, flying was more than travel, it was reflection time. He liked silence, calm, and order, and everything seemed to fall into place. But for Clara, every second felt heavy. She had barely slept, dealing with personal issues that no one on the plane knew about. When the plane took off, Marcus asked for a simple black coffee. Clara nodded and went to prepare it, but a small spill in the galley made her more nervous. She took longer than usual. When she finally returned, Marcus politely said, "Thank you, but please be careful next time. I prefer it a bit stronger." His voice was calm, but his tone carried authority. For Clara, already on edge, those words cut deeper than he intended. She forced a smile and nodded, but inside, frustration simmered. A few minutes later, she overheard Marcus quietly giving feedback to another crew member about attention to detail. Though he wasn't talking about her, Clara took it personally. To her, it felt like he was questioning her competence. Her mind started replaying every stressful moment of the morning. The tension she had held in began to grow. The jet's elegant cabin now felt small, almost suffocating. Marcus continued his discussion with his executives, unaware of the emotional storm just a few steps away. He was talking about leadership, about how respect and patience build trust. The irony of the situation was almost poetic, though no one could see it yet. Clara, still upset, walked past him carrying a tray. One of Marcus's assistants asked her for another drink, and she sighed audibly. Marcus looked up, his calm expression soft but firm. "Is everything okay, miss?" he asked gently. That question, meant as kindness, was the spark. Clara felt embarrassed, as if the entire cabin was watching her every move. Her thoughts blurred with emotion. In that single moment, logic disappeared. She turned to respond, but words failed her. Instead, a sharp, impulsive motion broke the silence. Her hand struck Marcus across the face. The sound was small, but in the quiet cabin it echoed like thunder. Everyone froze. Time seemed to stop. The executive's jaws dropped. One of them gasped softly. Marcus didn't move. His eyes widened, but his face stayed composed. Clara instantly realized what she had done. Her hand trembled. She whispered an apology that no one could fully hear. The jet felt colder now. No one spoke. Even the engine seemed quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Marcus slowly leaned back in his seat. His team looked at him, waiting for his reaction. But he didn't shout. He didn't call for help or demand punishment. He just sat there silent with a calm that was more frightening than anger. That silence said more than words ever could. For the next few minutes, no one dared to speak. Clara stood by the galley, tears starting to form. Her mind raced with regret. She wished she could undo what had just happened. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, wondering what their boss would do. To the others, Marcus looked composed. But inside he was hurt, not by the physical act, but by what it represented. Disrespect, impulsiveness, and a complete lack of professionalism on his own jet. A place that was supposed to represent excellence, control, and peace. He replayed the moment in his head again and again, trying to understand how something so small could explode into something so shocking. In those 10 quiet minutes, the atmosphere on the plane changed forever. Everyone knew that when Marcus finally spoke, nothing would be the same. The man known for his calm decisions was about to make one that no one would forget. The cabin was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, afraid to move or even blink. 10 minutes had passed since the shocking moment when Clara's hand had met Marcus's cheek. No one could understand how things had spiraled so fast. The private jet, once filled with polite conversation and laughter, now felt like a storm cloud hanging in the sky. Clara stood near the galley, her mind spinning. She couldn't believe what she had done. Just a few hours ago, she was preparing for a smooth flight with one of the world's most respected CEOs. Now she had crossed a line no one in her position ever should. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but every second felt like a countdown to disaster. Her hands trembled as she adjusted a napkin on the counter, pretending to tidy up, but everyone could see her fear. Marcus, however, remained still. His calmness was unnerving. He hadn't said a single word since it happened. His eyes were fixed on the window, watching the endless sky outside as if searching for answers beyond the clouds. His team whispered among themselves, their voices barely audible. They were afraid. Afraid for their jobs. Afraid for what this silence meant. Finally, Marcus turned his head, his eyes calm but cold. "Does anyone here have something to say?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The question wasn't just for Clara, it was for everyone. His words cut through the air like a blade. No one responded. The executives stared at their shoes, pretending not to hear. The co-pilot looked straight ahead, hands tight on the controls. That moment of silence was more powerful than any argument. Marcus could feel it, the fear, the guilt, and the lack of courage around him. Not one person stood up. Not one word of defense or apology came from his team. They were all waiting for him to decide what came next, just like they always did. That realization struck him deeper than Clara's slap ever could. Clara, finally gathering her courage, whispered, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Please, it was a mistake." Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes. She wanted to explain, to fix it somehow, but Marcus didn't reply. He looked at her, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it made her shrink back. The hum of the engines was the only sound in the cabin. Every second stretched like an hour. The tension was unbearable. Marcus slowly stood up, adjusting his jacket. His movements were calm, controlled, like a man preparing to make a decision that would change everything. He looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of each person who had been silent during the chaos. His gaze lingered on them one by one, as if measuring their worth. To Marcus, leadership had always been about strength, loyalty, and unity. But what he saw now was fear and hesitation. Not one member of his trusted team had stepped forward. Not one had tried to protect him, calm the situation, or even acknowledge what had happened. Their silence spoke louder than the slap itself. He sat back down and said softly, 10 minutes ago, something broke in this cabin. It wasn't just discipline, it was trust." His team exchanged nervous glances. They knew that tone. It was the one Marcus used before making big, irreversible decisions. Clara wiped her tears silently, realizing that her mistake had gone beyond an impulsive act. It had exposed the true nature of everyone on that flight. The man she had disrespected wasn't just her passenger. He was someone who built his life on integrity, and she had shattered that peace in one careless moment. Outside, the sky was clear and golden as the sun began to set. But inside the jet, it felt darker than ever. Something inside Marcus had shifted. The calm before the storm was over. Now everyone waited to see what the storm itself would bring. The silence inside the jet was no longer just quiet. It was painful. It pressed against everyone's chest like invisible weight. Clara stood frozen near the aisle, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously. Marcus sat perfectly still in his seat, staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Every second that passed felt heavier than the one before. His team, usually confident and talkative, now looked like school children waiting for punishment. The sound of the engines filled the emptiness. Outside the window, soft clouds floated by peacefully, unaware of the chaos brewing inside the luxurious cabin. It was strange how calm the world looked, while everything inside the jet was falling apart. Marcus finally blinked, breaking the stillness. He lifted his hand slowly, touching his cheek where Clara's palm had struck him. It didn't hurt anymore, not physically. What hurt was something deeper. A sharp wound to his pride, to his dignity, to everything he had built his reputation on. He had faced betrayal in business before, but never something this personal, this humiliating. Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, but her voice refused to come out. "Sir, She started softly, but Marcus raised his hand slightly, silencing her without a word. That single gesture made her heart drop. It was worse than yelling. His calmness scared her more than anger ever could. The executives sat like statues. No one dared to make eye contact with him. Some looked out the window, pretending to admire the clouds, but their thoughts were spinning. They all knew this moment would define their future with the company. Marcus finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His deep voice cut through the air. "Does anyone here know what just happened?" he asked, his tone low and controlled. The question wasn't really meant to be answered. It was a mirror, forcing everyone to face the truth. No one spoke. One of his senior advisors, a man who had worked beside Marcus for years, tried to meet his eyes but quickly looked away. That was all Marcus needed to see. Their silence confirmed everything. Not one of them had the courage to stand up or even ask if he was okay. He took a slow breath, his mind running through the years of loyalty and trust he thought he had built with these people. Suddenly he saw cracks that had probably been there all along, hidden behind polite smiles and yes sir attitudes. This moment didn't just reveal Clara's weakness. It exposed everyone's. Clara's knees felt weak. She whispered again, "Sir, please." "I didn't mean it." Her voice trembled, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Marcus turned his gaze toward her, not cruelly, but with a deep sadness. "You didn't mean it," he repeated quietly, "but you did it." His words were slow and deliberate. Sometimes that's all it takes, a single choice to show who we really are. The air in the cabin grew colder. His team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew Marcus wasn't just talking to her anymore. His words carried a wider meaning, a warning that none of them could ignore. Then, almost unexpectedly, Marcus stood up. He walked toward the front of the cabin, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the tense air. Everyone's eyes followed him, hearts racing. He stopped by the window and looked out at the clouds again. When he spoke next, his tone was calm but final. "I gave all of you this flight, this company, this trust," he said quietly. "But today I realized something. None of you stood for what's right when it mattered." He turned around slowly, meeting their frightened eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice firm but not cruel, "you will leave this jet when we land. And the rest of you," he paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You're done too. All of you." A sharp gasp broke from one of the executives. Another whispered, "Sir, please, let's discuss." Marcus raised his hand again, silencing him. 10 minutes, he said simply. "That's how long I waited, for someone to show loyalty, courage, or even basic decency. 10 minutes, and no one did." Clara broke down completely, sobbing softly into her hands. The executives sat frozen, faces pale with disbelief. The man they admired for his calmness had just dismantled everything they thought was stable. Marcus returned to his seat, his expression still calm but his eyes distant. He looked out the window one last time. The clouds drifted on, bright and soft, as if mocking the chaos inside the jet. No one spoke for the rest of the flight. Every tick of the clock echoed the same message. Respect, once lost, can never truly be rebuilt. The plane cut through the sky in absolute silence. Even the steady hum of the engine sounded distant, like a faint echo in another world. The luxurious cabin, once full of laughter and ambition, now felt like a courtroom. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. Every person on board understood that a line had been crossed and there was no going back. Marcus sat still in his seat, his face calm but unreadable. To his team, he looked like a man lost in thought, but inside his mind was a storm. The sting of the slap had faded, yet the weight of disappointment pressed down harder with every minute. He wasn't angry in the usual sense. He was hurt in a way that words couldn't explain. It wasn't just the flight attendant's disrespect that cut him. It was the silence of his own people, the people he had trusted for years. He thought back to all the nights he had stayed late at the office, mentoring these same individuals. He had taught them about courage, about integrity, about standing up for what was right even when it was uncomfortable. But when the moment came when true character was tested, not one of them spoke. They had all chosen safety over loyalty. That, to Marcus, was the greatest betrayal. Clara sat at the far end of the cabin, her face pale and wet with tears. She kept her head low, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every second of silence was torture. She wished Marcus would shout, insult her, do anything, because silence was worse. It felt like being erased, like she no longer existed in that world of luxury and control. The rest of the team sat stiffly, avoiding Marcus's gaze. They wanted to apologize, to explain, but they didn't know how. Every sound, even the soft creak of the leather seats, seemed too loud. Time felt stretched thin, each minute a punishment. Marcus finally closed his eyes. The faint vibration of the jet reminded him that life was still moving forward, even as his trust in people crumbled. He thought about the lesson in all of this. The reminder that success doesn't protect you from betrayal and power doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes, even in the skies, you find yourself completely alone. He opened his eyes again and looked out the window. The clouds glowed gold and pink from the setting sun, a breathtaking view that should have felt peaceful. But to Marcus, it only felt ironic. Nature was beautiful and calm, while human hearts were messy and unpredictable. Clara stood up quietly, unable to bear the silence any longer. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Sir, please, I'll accept whatever punishment you give. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to say I'm sorry." Her words trembled through the quiet cabin. Marcus didn't look at her right away. He took a deep breath before answering. "You don't just owe me an apology, Clara," he said softly, his tone steady but cold. "You owe it to yourself to understand why you lost control. Respect isn't just about who you serve, it's about who you are." Those words hung in the air like smoke. Clara nodded weakly, tears rolling down her cheeks. There was nothing left to say. Marcus turned his attention to his executives. "And as for the rest of you," he said, his gaze sweeping across them, "don't think I fired you because of one incident. I fired you because this moment revealed something deeper. When things went wrong, you froze. You waited for someone else to act. That's not leadership. That's fear." No one argued. They couldn't. He was right. The plane continued its steady flight miles above the earth, where clouds hid cities, people, and noise far below. Up here, everything was quiet, detached, and yet inside, emotions boiled like a storm trapped under glass. As the minutes passed, the captain's voice finally broke the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly." It was the first human sound that didn't carry guilt or shame, but for everyone inside, it felt like an ending. Marcus leaned back, his eyes fixed on the fading horizon. He wasn't thinking about revenge or anger anymore. He was thinking about lessons, about how one moment of weakness could expose the truth about everyone around you. 10 minutes had changed everything. He whispered softly to himself. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. And with that, he closed his eyes again, letting the quiet swallow the last of the chaos as the jet descended toward the ground, carrying broken trust, heavy hearts, and one man who had finally seen the truth about the people closest to him. The jet sliced through the clouds as it began its slow descent, but inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension. Everyone sat frozen, afraid to breathe too loudly. Marcus Ellison, the man who had built an empire with grace and intelligence, now looked like someone who had lost all faith in the people around him. His calm eyes stared ahead, but his mind was far away, somewhere between anger and deep reflection. The slap had been shocking, yes, but what hurt most wasn't the sting on his face. It was what came after, the silence. The people he had trusted for years, the ones who called him sir and admired his leadership, had sat still like strangers. Not one of them had moved, spoken, or even looked at him with concern. Their loyalty, he realized, had limits, and those limits appeared when courage was needed most. The plane's cabin lights dimmed as they began to prepare for landing. Clara sat stiffly in her seat, eyes red from crying. Her mind was spinning. Every time she blinked, she saw that moment again, her hand rising, his face turning in shock, the sound echoing in her ears. She had destroyed her own career in a single moment of weakness. But what she didn't know was that she had also exposed the truth about everyone else in that cabin. Marcus finally stood up. The soft rustle of his movement made everyone tense. He buttoned his jacket, walked to the center of the aisle, and looked at each of them one by one. His voice when he spoke was calm, too calm. "Do you know what loyalty means?" he asked softly. No one answered. His tone wasn't angry, but something about it sent chills down their spines. "It's not about obeying orders," he continued. "It's about standing for what's right. It's about doing the hard thing when no one else will." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces that had once looked at him with admiration. "When she hit me," he said, nodding slightly toward Clara, "I didn't expect anyone to fight her, but I did expect someone to stand up, to say it was wrong, to show some courage." The silence that followed was deafening. His words sliced through the air like a blade. Marcus's assistant, a young man who had always followed his every instruction, finally opened his mouth. "Sir, we didn't know what to do," he stammered. "It happened so fast." Marcus turned his gaze on him. "That's when true character shows, when things happen fast," he said sharply. "Courage doesn't wait for permission." He took a deep breath, then looked out the window. The city lights twinkled far below, tiny specks against the dark earth. They reminded him of how small people could be, how fragile trust really was. He turned back to them and spoke the words that would change everything. "When we land," he said, his voice steady. "You're all done." Every one of you, gasps filled the cabin. His marketing director whispered, "Sir, you can't mean—" "I mean it," Marcus interrupted, his tone final. "You had 10 minutes to show integrity, and you chose silence. That's not the team I built." Clara covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. The rest of the team sat frozen, shock written on their faces. They had seen Marcus make tough business decisions before, but never anything like this. This was personal. This was raw. Marcus continued, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "I didn't build my company to be surrounded by fear. I built it with people who believed in doing what's right. But fear, it kills honesty. It kills loyalty. And I can't lead a team that's afraid to speak." He looked around the cabin one last time, as if memorizing their faces, not with hate, but with sadness. These were people he had shared victories with, people he had trusted. But in one moment they had shown him who they really were. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their final descent. Marcus returned to his seat, straightened his jacket and looked out at the fading sunset. His reflection in the glass stared back. A man who had just made a choice that would reshape everything. No one spoke again. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Clara wiped her tears silently, whispering to herself that she wished she could turn back time. But deep down, everyone knew this was the point of no return. As the jet glided lower toward the runway, Marcus whispered quietly, almost to himself, "Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find the truth." The wheels touched down smoothly, but nothing about the landing felt peaceful. The sound of rubber meeting runway was like a verdict being delivered. For everyone on board, life as they knew it had just ended. The jet touched the runway with a soft thud, but to everyone on board it felt like an earthquake. The sound of the wheels screeching against the ground broke the long silence, yet no one dared to speak. The cabin lights glowed dimly as the aircraft slowed to a stop, but the mood remained dark, heavy, and suffocating. Everyone's heart was racing, not because of the landing, but because they knew what waited once the doors opened. Marcus didn't move right away. He sat in his seat looking out the window, watching the airport lights flicker in the distance. His reflection stared back at him, a calm, powerful man who had just made the hardest decision of his life. He had fired everyone he trusted, and though his face didn't show it, the weight of that decision pressed on his chest like a stone. Clara was still crying quietly in the back, her face hidden behind her hands. Her once crisp uniform was now wrinkled, her confidence completely gone. Every second that passed felt like punishment. She wanted to say something, to beg again, but she knew words would only make things worse. The rest of the team sat in stunned silence. No one had touched their phones. No one had even looked at each other. They were all trapped in their own thoughts, their own guilt. They didn't know how to explain to themselves what had happened, let alone to anyone else. When the engines finally powered down, the sound of the door unlocking echoed through the cabin. Marcus stood up slowly, adjusted his tie, and gave one last look around. His expression was calm, but there was something cold in his eyes, something final. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Security will handle everything from here." It was the last thing he said to any of them. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the exit. The sound of his shoes against the floor was the only noise in the cabin. Clara couldn't even lift her head to look at him as he passed. She felt like she was fading into the background of her own life, erased by one terrible mistake. As Marcus stepped off the jet, the cool night air hit his face. It was refreshing yet heavy with reality. A line of black cars waited on the runway, headlights slicing through the darkness. His assistant, now ex-assistant, watched him go, eyes full of regret. But Marcus never looked back. Within an hour, the story began to spread. Someone from the airport staff had seen Clara crying as she was escorted away. Another worker had overheard bits of the argument from the cabin door. And just like that, the story traveled, first to a few ears, then to dozens, and by morning it was everywhere. Flight attendant hits black, CEO on private jet. CEO fires entire team 10 minutes after being slapped. The headlines exploded across social media like wildfire. People online couldn't believe it. Some called Marcus heartless. Others called him a hero. Everyone had an opinion, but no one knew the full truth. News anchors debated whether he overreacted, while others praised his composure. Clara's face appeared in screenshots, and soon, strangers were digging into her past, her job history, even her old photos. The world had turned the private moment into public judgment. Marcus, meanwhile, stayed silent. He didn't release a statement, didn't defend himself, didn't blame anyone. He went to his office the next morning as if nothing had happened. To the world, it looked like a man unfazed by chaos. But inside, Marcus was still processing what the incident had revealed, not just about his team, but about himself. For him, that flight had been more than just a trip gone wrong. It was a mirror. It showed him how fragile respect could be, how quickly loyalty could disappear, and how power doesn't protect you from betrayal. That night, as the world argued over his actions, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse. The city lights shimmered below, silent and distant. He poured himself a glass of water and looked out the window, lost in thought. He remembered every detail of that flight, the slap, the silence, the looks of fear. But what stayed with him most was the realization that leadership isn't just about control or authority. It's about the people who stand with you when things fall apart. And now he knew exactly who those people were, and who they weren't. Outside, the world talked endlessly about the scandal. But inside, Marcus Ellison had already moved beyond it. He wasn't thinking about revenge or redemption. He was thinking about rebuilding, this time with people who understood that loyalty is measured not in words but in action. Days turned into weeks, yet the story of that flight refused to die. News channels still replayed it. Social media still argued about it. Some called Marcus Ellison ruthless, others called him courageous. Everyone had an opinion, but no one knew the man behind the silence. Through it all, Marcus said nothing. Not a single interview, not one statement. He let the world talk while he stayed focused on something bigger, understanding what the entire event truly meant. One quiet morning, nearly a month later, Marcus arrived early at his company's headquarters. The sun was just rising, washing the glass walls in a golden glow. He stood at the window of his top-floor office, staring at the skyline. The same calm expression rested on his face, but inside something had changed. The man who once believed success was built on structure and rules now understood it was built on people and the values they lived by. That afternoon, without warning, Marcus broke his silence. He stood before his entire company at a town hall meeting, hundreds of employees waiting, curious, nervous, some even inspired. Cameras were off. This wasn't about publicity. It was about truth. He began slowly, his voice low but steady. "Many of you have heard what happened on that flight," he said. "You've heard rumors, opinions, and half-truths. But today I'm not here to explain or defend anything. I'm here to share what I learned." The room went silent. Every eye was fixed on him. "When that incident happened," he continued, "I wasn't just slapped across the face. I was reminded of something I had forgotten, that respect is not a one-way street. It's not something you demand. It's something you earn over and over again. But when that respect is broken, when silence replaces courage, everything we build begins to crumble." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The audience could feel his honesty. There was no anger in his tone, just clarity. "I fired my team not out of rage," he said softly. but because they showed me something I couldn't ignore. In the hardest moments, the people around you reveal who they really are. Some stay silent, some walk away, and a few stand up for what's right. Those are the people worth keeping. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the air seemed to still. Marcus took a deep breath, looking around the room. Leadership isn't about power, he said. It's about responsibility. It's about protecting what's right, even when it costs you something. I made a choice that day, a painful one, but it taught me the value of truth and courage. He looked out at his employees, his voice softening. If you ever find yourself in a moment where doing the right thing feels hard, do it anyway. Because silence, my friends, is also a choice, and it speaks louder than any words. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then one by one, people began to clap. The applause grew louder, filling the room, echoing through the halls. It wasn't the kind of applause for a powerful speech. It was the kind that came from respect. True respect. That day, Marcus didn't just regain control of his company. He regained something far more valuable: purpose. Outside the building, the media waited, still hoping for a headline. But Marcus walked past them with quiet dignity, a slight smile on his face. He didn't need to explain himself anymore. The world could keep its noise. He had found peace in truth. Later that evening, as he sat alone by his window, watching the sunset paint the sky, he thought about how everything had changed. A single act of disrespect had revealed weakness, but it had also awakened strength. He had rebuilt not just his team, but himself. He whispered softly, almost to the fading light. Sometimes the fall is what teaches you how to rise. And with that, he closed his eyes and finally allowed himself to rest. Calm, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and the storm that once surrounded Marcus Ellison slowly began to fade. The headlines had changed, the world had moved on, but for Marcus, the echoes of that flight still lived quietly in his memory. What had started as a moment of humiliation had turned into a journey of self-discovery, one that reshaped not only his leadership, but his understanding of human nature itself. He had rebuilt his team from the ground up. This time, he didn't look for perfect resumes or fancy titles. He looked for character, for people who spoke with honesty, acted with courage, and treated others with respect. His new office atmosphere felt different, calmer, warmer, more alive. There was laughter in the halls again, not fear. The company, which had stumbled briefly after the scandal, was now stronger than ever. But even with all his success, Marcus often found himself thinking back to that flight, the slap, the silence, the decision. It was strange how a single moment could change the course of a lifetime. Sometimes he wondered what had happened to Clara, the flight attendant who had lost everything in 10 seconds of anger. One rainy evening, as Marcus was leaving the office, he noticed a woman standing near the building's entrance, holding a folder close to her chest. Her clothes were simple, her posture uncertain. When she lifted her head, Marcus froze. It was Clara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected in the puddles around them, and the soft sound of rain filled the silence. Clara took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Ellison, I didn't come here to ask for anything. I just wanted to thank you." Marcus was taken aback. "Thank me?" he asked, his tone gentle but curious. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "After what happened, I thought my life was over. I lost my job, my confidence, everything. But that moment, it forced me to see myself clearly. I went back to school. I studied conflict management, and now I help train airline staff to handle stress without losing control. I teach them what I learned the hardest way possible." For the first time in a long while, Marcus smiled, a soft, genuine smile. He looked at her not with anger or pity, but with quiet respect. "I'm glad you found your way," he said. "Pain can be a cruel teacher, but it's still a teacher." Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You taught me that silence has consequences. That respect isn't about rank or power. It's about humanity. I'll never forget that." They stood there for a moment under the streetlights, two people who had once been enemies now connected by understanding. The rain softened around them as if the world itself had forgiven what happened. Marcus extended his hand. "We both learned something that day," he said. "Maybe that's what it was meant for." Clara hesitated, then shook his hand. Her smile was small but sincere, and in that brief moment the past lost its sharp edges. As she walked away, Marcus watched her disappear into the busy city night. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, something he hadn't felt since that fateful flight. It wasn't the peace that comes from forgetting. It was the kind that comes from understanding. Later that night, sitting by his window once again, Marcus thought about how strange life was. One impulsive moment of anger had destroyed so much. Yet in its aftermath, it had built something far greater. Wisdom, humility, and redemption. He looked up at the stars, their faint glow reflected in his glass. Maybe, he whispered to himself, every storm leaves something behind, a lesson, a truth, or a chance to start over. And somewhere in that quiet thought, Marcus Ellison finally let go of the past, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because sometimes the hardest moments don't break us. They prepare us for who we're meant to become.